So with the release of Sonic Frontiers, we have a new chapter in the story of Sonic, and we get to see a different side of Eggman than we're usually used to seeing, and that is a much more human side, emotional side. And while it's really great to see that, I can't help but feel that it takes away from what his character is supposed to be. He's supposed to be menacing. He's supposed to be threatening. And look, I'm all for characters changing over time, but I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of his character as of late. Now, I do want to clarify, it's not an issue that they're showing a human side of his character. He is human at the end of the day, and I think that's a good thing to explore, but not to the detriment of the core of his character, which is he's ruthless. He'll do anything to get what he wants. He'll lie, he'll manipulate. His ego is continuously getting out of control. He's always in over his head. I'd say being in over his head is like the one thing they've got right in Frontiers, but everything else seems to be missing. So I think the problem is that he's the central villain of this series. When there's no other villains, he's the villain. And most of the time in the official games, like, he is the main villain of the story. Even if it doesn't seem like it at first, they'll throw a twist at you and be like, oh, it actually was Eggman all along. And I just feel like the last time Eggman truly felt like he was a threat was probably Sonic Unleashed. You know, turning Sonic into the werehog and shooting him out of space into the planet that he just broke apart. I mean, that opening sequence of Unleashed was just so well done and really highlighted that. He uses the fact that Sonic and his friends don't actually want to hurt him, and if he shows that he's surrendering, they'll show him mercy, and then he uses that moment to get the upper hand. And it's like, yes, that is Eggman. Someone who will do whatever it takes to get what he wants and to achieve his goals. I mean, let's not forget Sonic Adventure 2, when he blew up half the moon just as a threat, to show that he was serious and what the Eclipse Cannon can really do. He wasn't joking around, he really was going to take over the world. And then in Sonic Forces, when he takes the Phantom Ruby, something he doesn't fully understand, and gives it to this mercenary, Zero, who then becomes Infinite, sort of taking a page out of Gerald's book, his grandfather, creating something with elements that he doesn't fully understand. It's that sort of desperation to achieve his goals that I just think is missing. He used to be willing to do anything to achieve his goals, and as of late, he's just been coming off a little bit weaker. I mean, he finally captures Sonic and doesn't dispose of him, just keeps him in a prison cell as if no one's gonna come and break him out. Like, he's just not scary. There's no plan to roboticize him. I know that's not a thing we usually see in the official games, but there has to be some urgent need for them to go save Sonic. When you just show him sitting there, like he's just awkwardly sitting there in handcuffs, throwing out quips, it doesn't work. No one is scared of Eggman, because we know, no matter what he says or does, when he has the opportunity to rid of one of his greatest adversaries, the one being that is always in his way, he just puts him in a metal box. Something doesn't work with that. A plot that could work, if we don't want to go down the roboticizing road, is maybe he sends him to another dimension. Maybe he traps him inside of a Phantom Ruby. Maybe he sends him back to the past somehow, or to the future. Or I know time travel is just not something we want to do after Sonic 06's story, because it just gets too complicated, and there needs to be a really good device that's not the Chaos Emeralds, because that would be just too overpowered to be able to send them back in time and forward in time. But obviously something like that doesn't exist. Eggman would have to invent that, and then you'd have to ask the question, well, if he invented it once, why wouldn't he invent it again? So that's out of the question. So maybe just another dimension that he can send Sonic to, another world, I don't know. Shoot him into outer space, into another planet, anything, but just leaving him in a cage. Maybe he takes Sonic DNA and he makes another Sonic, and one that will follow his orders, or whatever. There has to just be some sort of plot that would be terrifying to think of. Like, maybe he uses Sonic as he would use the woodland creatures to power one of his robots, so Sonic is trapped inside of one of these robots, and you could tell like a E102 Gamma type story where he has to take over the will of the robot and sort of overcome that mental battle. Now, I know all this is really weird and kind of out there, but anything is better than what we got in Forces. and I'm just throwing ideas around. And that's why I think the classic story of Eggman stealing one of Sonic's friends and roboticizing them is just the best way to go about it, or sending them to another dimension where they're lost and they have to find their way back, and there's a challenge to that. It tests the hero. You know, there has to be a punishment for the hero losing. There has to be high stakes so that it's entertaining to watch, so that you're actually on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen here. I think Forces had a really great opportunity to tell a story like this, but they just missed the mark so hard. I don't even know how they turn it around after that. It's like we've now seen what it would look like if Eggman took over, what was it, 99% of the world, and nothing happened. There was no threat. There was not really that many challenges to overcome. It was a very flat and boring story. There's so much fun to have with Eggman taking over 99% of the planet, and they didn't take advantage of any of that. It's definitely their biggest missed opportunity, because that's the time you really show how much of a villain Eggman can really be. But okay, let's assume that nothing changes in the official games. The way they write Eggman stays the same. There could be another way to solve this issue with a character that they haven't really touched in a long time, and that's Eggman Nega. This is an Eggman that's about roughly 200 years from the future, that's proven to be much more ruthless and menacing than the Eggman from the present. He's actually my main villain for Sonic Cybernetics. At the end of working on Revolution, I figured that since Eggman died at like the beginning of my series, I wanted that type of villain back, but I couldn't just bring Eggman back because he's gone for good. So I decided to write him into the fold, and I have to say, to actually make Eggman not just a threat in the sense of his IQ and how smart he is and all the things he can create, but also making him a physical threat where he can kind of keep up with the strength and the speed of the Mobians. It kind of transformed him into a whole new kind of threat that, for once, as I was working on it, I just suddenly realized this has kind of been what I've wanted from the official games, some way to make Eggman, or an Eggman type character, to be truly terrifying and actually make you worry for the heroes. So I'm keeping the element of he's taking control of something he doesn't fully understand, but instead of him losing control of it, he loses control of himself. He becomes addicted to this power. And I know this isn't the original Eggman, but it would also work with his character too. But that aside, looking at it from his perspective, he's been fighting them inside his Eggmobile, hidden away in some robot or some hidden base. He doesn't have to be afraid anymore, because now he has an extra boost of confidence knowing that he can fight them. And then you have to ask, well, what is that going to do to his already inflated ego? And the answer is, it's only going to inflate it even more. And so, with his ego inflated to an exponential degree, on top of the fact that he's addicted to this thing that is corrupting his mind, and he's becoming obsessed with it, he wants to know everything about it, he tracks down Infinite and tries to force him to teach him how to create the Phantom Ruby illusions and its power to travel to other dimensions. And when he refuses, he traps him inside the Phantom Ruby itself, most likely some Phantom Ruby dimension. So going back to the official stories, a way I think this kind of story could be applied is make Eggman lose himself, make him lose his mind, make his mind corrupted, or make him obsessed with something. And it just popped into my head what that could be. If he loses Sage, someone who he sees as his own daughter, there could be some sort of obsession and desperation to rebuild Sage, and maybe when he rebuilds her AI, the little bit of good that we saw in her in Frontiers is no longer there, and she's just completely evil, and it creates this whole other story of like he has to destroy this thing which he loves, but he knows it's not good for the world, and he has to overcome that himself. And maybe he doesn't overcome that, and he's devastated when Sonic or Shadow or whoever has to destroy this thing. It would make for a really emotional story, a really personal story for the villain, where you could be afraid of Eggman, but then at the end, you could feel for him and sort of understand where he's coming from and why he was doing all of this. So the answer, in my opinion, Eggman has to lose control of himself, because then he's a danger to everyone, and that is always going to be more terrifying. Love is a very powerful thing, and of course, Sage isn't real, but Eggman has been so lonely all these years, he's not even really thinking about that. He just wants that human connection that he's been longing for years, probably decades. These robots talking to him only do so much. I mean, he programs them to do so, to be on his side. But Sage is an AI who thinks for herself, himself. So it's just a different dynamic. We've seen stories before where a character falls in love or has some special connection with an AI, and I feel like just take that, give it to Eggman, but have that be his motivation for becoming even more ruthless and villainous and desperate to save her at any cost. And it's kind of like Mr. Freeze with Nora. He doesn't care what it takes. He's going to save her, and if anyone gets in the way, they're dead. They're getting the freeze gun. So I know I always bring up Batman, but I don't try to. It just has a lot of good comparisons that I can use to give a picture of what I'm trying to convey here. Also, I really like Batman, but there's plenty of other villains I'm sure that are like that. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm so happy to see the channel growing and to be having interesting conversations with you guys in the comments. So leave a comment. I will respond to as many of them as I can. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. With that being said, thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.